A wind howls through the thatched rafters of a dying village, where every breath carries the scent of damp earth and frozen dung. The sun, if it rises at all, brings no warmth. Only a pale, silvery light that settles like frost on empty baskets and bare trees. A child clutches a spoon too large for his hands, but the bowl beneath it holds nothing. In the silence, the only sound is the gnawing of teeth against bark and bone. Hunger has become a second skin. It begins with small absences, a missing chicken, the bread that fails to rise, the absence of laughter in a home where it once echoed. Then, as the snow thickens and the days wither, the absences become louder. No smoke in the chimneys, no tracks on the road, no bells from the church tower. Just stillness. A stillness that tightens around the heart like rope drawn wet, then frozen. The first snow falls like a shroud. Men trudge into the woods with frostbitten fingers, searching for anything that might burn. Bark is stripped from trees and gnawed into pulp. Women kneel by cold hearths, scraping lard from old pots, whispering prayers to saints who do not answer. The church bells still ring, but their iron voices echo across empty fields like morning calls. There is no congregation left to gather, only scattered souls too weak to rise, and so they stay inside, watching breath fog the air, counting the knots in their wooden walls to pass the hours. Hope, once spoken in soft tones by firelight, has been replaced by calculation. How long will the oats last? Can the goat survive one more week? Will the neighbor trade onions for wool? The questions come in silence, but they hang in the air like icicles, sharp, constant, unspoken. The worst hunger arrives not with December, but with January. The mind begins to unravel. Faces lose their names. Days lose their order. They chew leather and pretend it's meat. Boil nettles until term. He pot is green and bitter. Drink thin broth made from bones kept since Michaelmas, licked clean and buried, then dug up again. A girl buries a doll beneath the snow. She believes if she gives something to the cold, it will give something back. Her father says nothing. He watches, arms crossed, knowing the dead do not return in spring. Inside a cottage, an old man sits hunched by the wall, fingering his rosary with blistered hands. He tells stories of feast days, Martinmas, Candlemas, Pentecost, as though speaking them might conjure warmth. But his words drift like smoke into the rafters and disappear. Outside, the snow thickens. It erases footprints, swallows doors, turns homes into tombs. Children disappear beneath wool and hay, sleeping for hours at a time, bodies conserving what little energy remains. And in the moments when the silence deepens too far, the village listens for sounds. Any sound. A crow, a creak, a knock. But even the birds have fled. Yet not all is lost. Not everything surrenders. A woman gathers moss from the stones of the chapel wall, drying it slowly beside the embers. She speaks to no one. But the act, simple, slow, reverent, becomes its own kind of worship. Others begin to mimic it. They dig beneath frozen thatch for insects. They crush acorns to mix with spoiled grain. They twist straw into cords to bind the wood they have left. In these acts, something ancient stirs. Rituals older than scripture return. Ways of surviving whispered by grandmothers long buried. How to trap a rat with string and soot. How to boil cloth for warmth. How to quiet a child's hunger with songs instead of food. Faith shifts, not toward heaven, but toward endurance. No longer do they pray for miracles. They pray for time, for patience, for the will to endure one more dawn. Winter becomes more than a season. It becomes a god. Not a god of mercy, but of judgment. A god who does not answer prayers, but watches, measures, waits. And to survive, they do not defy it. They kneel before it, heads bowed, bones aching, hands open. They whisper old names into the fire. They sleep in bundles of skin and straw. They barter not in coin, but in memory. Stories for bread, lullabies for warmth, silence for safety. And slowly, beneath the snow, they endure. The village breathes, shallow but steady. Doors stay shut, but not broken. Faces thin, but eyes still open. There are no feasts, no songs, no triumphs. But there is breath. There is waiting. And that is enough. For now. Because beneath this hunger, beneath this silence, something else stirs. Distant hooves in the snow, the creak of a wagon, the glint of something alive on the horizon. Spring will come, but it will not come softly. It will arrive through sacrifice, through sorrow, through what must be lost before warmth returns. And in that next chapter, when the thaw begins and the world must rise again, we will see what price was paid for survival, and who remained to count the cost. Beneath the colorless hush of winter, the world no longer breathes. It only waits. A branch snaps in the forest like a broken oath, and the woman flinches, though no one is there. Her feet crunch over frozen moss, her shawl stiff with rime. In the morning haze, her figure is half smoke, half flesh, drawn forward by duty, not strength. The frost clings to her, like a memory that refuses to die. And yet she walks, always walking. For in this age, stillness is a kind of death. The sky is a bruised canvas of grey, and the wind tastes of iron. She clutches her basket like it holds the fate of the world. The frozen turnips inside, hard as bone, bitter as regret, are not food, but sacrifice. With every step, she descends further from what life once meant. The idea of a full meal is no longer a hope. It is myth, like saints, like summer. Behind her, smoke rises thin from a single chimney in the village, not warmth, but warning. Something still clings to life here. Barely. Inside the sea, cottage, the air is sour with damp wool and skin. Her eldest son stares at the ceiling beams, lips cracked, eyes glassy. Her daughter hums without melody, a tune sung only to hunger. The baby no longer cries. There's no sound in him but breath, and even that comes like a negotiation. The mother leans against the doorframe, and in that stillness, her knees tremble. But she cannot fall. She is the only one left who remembers what movement means. The villagers speak less each day. Words cost energy. Their eyes say enough. A woman once known for laughter now glares like a dog guarding scraps. A man once proud now hunches, not from age, but from guilt. He still sharpens his blade each morning, though he has no game left to hunt. His hands remember the shape of meat, but his stomach does not. The forge is cold. The well grows sour. Even the church bell has gone silent, its tongue too heavy to lift in a world without miracles. She passes the manor house on her walk. Its banners are faded, but its gates stand tall. Inside, bread still rises, and meat still hisses in the pan. The scent travels down to the village like a cruel sermon. The steward once offered her a boiled bone if she'd scrub floors. She took it. She didn't speak. Pride is the first thing hunger eats. The second is the past. She no longer dreams of spring. She dreams of anything warm enough to swallow. At the edge of the woods, she finds something. Not food, but tracks. A rabbit, maybe, or a fox. Her heart stirs, not with hope, but instinct. She kneels, fingers pressed to the snow, and for a moment she imagines teeth, her own, sinking into hot flesh. Then she hears it. A crack. A rustle. She turns too slow. A bird takes off, and the silence returns, mocking, eternal. From the west, she imagines it moving, as if he's returned. But wind is a liar, and time does not resurrect. By the fire, she sits alone. The coals pulse like the heart of a dying beast. Her eyes trace the cracks in the stone, the mold on the beams. Everything decays, but not the will. Not entirely. She presses her hand to her belly, flat, cold, but alive. That, she thinks, is the curse of survival. To endure even when there's nothing left to endure for. And still, she does. The hunger no longer startles her. It is company. It speaks to her in dreams, in aches, in silence. It teaches her to measure time not by days, but by bites. A root lasts 2 nights. A heel of bread, 3. A dead crow, nearly a week. She has learned the language of hunger. And in that language, there are no lies. And yet, there are moments. Flickers. Her daughter draws on the wall with charcoal, shapes of trees and suns. Her son ties rope from reeds. They are not just surviving. They are imagining. Even now. Even here. That is what frightens her most. Not that they suffer, but that they still believe it will end. Outside, snow begins to fall again. Soft, slow, unannounced. It does not scream. It set, tolls, covers the bones of the dead cart, the orchard roots, the cracked fields. It covers everything except the tracks she made that morning, still leading out past the trees. She looks out the window, watches it vanish. And in that vanishing, there is something strange. Not hope, but promise. That tomorrow she will rise again and walk again. Not because she believes, but because there is no other choice. The wind shifts, carries with it the sound of iron on wood, a cart, a visitor, or something else entirely. She stands slowly, unsure if it's fear or habit that moves her. Outside, in the growing dusk, a new silence arrives, the kind that means something has changed. And the story, once frozen, begins again. A single candle sputters in a cracked horn lantern, casting weak, trembling light across the floor, dirt-packed and scabbed with frost. Each gust of wind outside causes the flame to flicker like a dying breath, and the hut groans as if remembering every winter it has ever endured. The roof weeps with snowmelt that never truly melts. Its beams, warped and blackened, sag under the weight of memory. Beyond the thin wooden walls, wolves move with the silence of smoke, their paws pressing soft tracks into the white wilderness. Their eyes catch the moonlight like silver coins, blinking in and out of the dark. One growls low, breath rising like steam from an open wound. Hunger lives in all things this winter, beast, man, and ghost alike. Inside, near the hearth where no fire lives, an old woman crouches beside the ashes. She is older than her years, which number more than most can remember. Her hands are cracked like dried earth, shaking but certain, as she draws symbols in the soot with a piece of charred birch. Words fall from her lips, half Latin, half something older, older than churches, older than kings. She does not speak to be heard. She speaks because in winters like these, speaking is a way of surviving. The dead must be remembered, or they will return. Her name is not important. In times like this, names slip like thawed snow from the roof, quietly without protest. But they still call her mother, even those she did not bear. Her presence is a fire that does not warm, but still protects. She remembers winters worse than this, and she knows what must be done when food turns sacred and time turns cruel. This is not hunger as the world now understands it. This is starvation wrapped in ritual, sacrifice made ordinary, survival redefined. Bread has become symbol, not sustenance. When a crust is found, it is held like relic, kissed and divided as if it were the body of a saint. A grain of salt, once used to preserve meat, now blesses it. It is scattered over pots not to flavor, but to honor. A pinch means you still believe in tomorrow. Children are no longer taught to weep when they are afraid. Tears are warmth escaping. Every drop is a betrayal of the body. Crying is luxury. So the little ones learn to sit still in silence, clutching their knees in corners, their eyes wide and unblinking like owls. Their breath comes in small clouds. They are learning to be statues. They are learning to survive. The men no longer go to church. Not because faith is gone, but because there is nothing to burn there. The altars are cold. The priests speak of heaven, but heaven does not boil water. It does not cook squirrel or warm fingers. The men kneel instead beside coals, praying through action, gathering pine cones, checking traps, whittling bone into fish hooks. The old woman teaches them, as her mother did. Flour from acorns, pounded, soaked, and cooked until the bitterness leaches out like poison. Moss boiled with wood ash. Dandelion roots. Birch bark. Things that live when nothing else does. Every object becomes a teacher. Even the black pot with its fractured rim becomes sacred, because it still holds heat. One boy returns from the woods, his boots wrapped in rags soaked through with blood and slush. He carries a squirrel in his hands like a holy offering. It is dead. It is perfect. It is enough. They prepare it with reverence. The creature is not skinned but undressed. Each motion is deliberate. No part will be wasted. Not the sinew, not the teeth, not the bones, which will be boiled again and again until the marrow gives its final breath. When they cook it over the coals, no one speaks. Silence is the closest thing they have to grace. Words are too heavy. Gratitude lives in the eyes, in the way the meat is passed slowly, in the sighs between bites. They chew carefully, almost guiltily. And when it's done, what remains is wrapped in worn linen, tied with a strip of bark, and buried beneath the snow. A feast, preserved. Treasure hidden beneath the frozen world. They do not trust pantries. They trust the cold. Time bends in a winter like this. Days stretch longer, not with light, but with waiting. Hunger thickens in the lungs. Dreams become cruel. They show bread and warmth and fields. Then they vanish. In these dreams, even the dead return, calling out names that no longer exist. Death, too, changes form. It does not arrive as a thief in the night. It seeps in like cold smoke. First, the old disappear quietly, wrapped in wool, still as wood. Then the very young, breath slowing like melting ice. There is no screaming, only stillness. And when they go, they are not buried. The earth is too hard. They are laid in snowbanks, covered in spruce. It is not desecration. It is hope that when the thaw comes, the ground will be soft enough to welcome them properly. The living carry the names. They speak them into smoke, into soup, into silence. Names whispered at night so they do not vanish completely. The old woman listens. She remembers all of them. She is a library that breathes. And then something shifts. Not warmth, not yet. But the wind smells different. It is not so sharp. It no longer cuts. It brushes. The snow begins to rot, slow and wet. Water drips. The wolves howl less. A raven returns. The ice in the well breaks. And with that, the first sign, mud. Thaw is not joy. It is disbelief. No one cheers. They step outside, squinting. They hold each other not in triumph, but in grief. Because spring does not erase what winter took. It only allows them to remember it. They begin again, not with celebration, but with silence. And in that silence, a question remains. Will next winter come sooner? Will they be ready? Or will memory fade like breath on glass? The frost came without warning. Not the crisp shimmer of an autumn morning, but a black frost, hard as bone and silent as guilt. It threaded its way through the thatch and timber, through the seams of boots and the weave of wool cloaks, curling in the breath of those who dared to rise before dawn. In the manor, ink froze in the wells before letters could be written. In the chapel, candles flickered once, then extinguished, leaving only the sound of old stone groaning beneath its own weight. Even the dogs stopped barking, as if they too sensed that something ancient had returned, something cold-blooded and patient. Before the hunger truly began, there was waiting, a cruel kind of anticipation. The villagers watched the sky, hoping for a thaw that never came. Daylight became a pale, brittle thing, not warmth, but simply less dark. By the second week of snow, the ground had turned to marble. Even graves could not be dug. The dead were wrapped in blankets and left in barns, ikar, yes, covered, mouths stuffed with herbs to keep the spirits from rising. The living moved through the village like ghosts already, layered in rags, faces hidden in scarves, soaked from their own breath. In the forge, the blacksmith's apprentice swung his axe with hands so cracked they bled into the grain of the wood. Each log he split was a prayer, a fight against the moment his master would tell him there was no more coal, no more iron, no more need for hammers, when bellies groaned louder than swords. At night, he did not sleep. He counted the blisters on his hands, naming them like saints. The midwife, once so certain in her hands and herbs, now sat in silence. Her cradle remained untouched since the child she tried to save died in her arms, with breath like frost. No bells had tolled for him. No priest had come. The baptism water had frozen solid, and the name she would have given the boy froze with it. She lit no fire, only a single candle, buried in a lantern, which she set beside the cradle like a ward, or perhaps an apology. Even the reeve, who had once strode through the village with a ledger and a key, began to falter. His duties, collecting dues, enforcing grain quotas, measuring what little could be measured, meant nothing now. He returned to the manor once with empty hands, and returned again with bruises on his ribs and silence on his lips. The ledger burned well in the hearth. The key he buried beneath the ash. By midwinter, the village no longer resembled itself. The market had vanished beneath a drift of snow and silence. The tavern's windows were boarded shut from the inside. Doors that once stood open to gossip and bread were now sealed with pitch, wrapped in wool, guarded with suspicion. No one knocked. No one answered. When footsteps crunched through the ice-packed snow, curtains twitched and breath was held. A pig disappeared from behind the baker's fence, its squeals muffled by a hand or a blade or hunger itself. Bread was no longer shared. It was baked by night, hidden in chimneys, eaten cold in corners. And yet, the people did not fall apart. They folded inward, like scrolls once read aloud, now locked in silence. Their language changed. Coins mattered less than warmth. A clay mug of broth could buy an hour by the fire. A story told well could be worth a strip of dried root. A look, a real look, not a glance, might save a life or doom it. Still, there were glimpses of something else. A boy with red cheeks lit a candle every evening, placing it at the edge of the wood where his sister had been buried last frost. He said nothing when asked. He just walked, placed it, and walked back. A girl, her shoes wrapped in linen, left a crust of rye near a hollow tree. Not for the poor, not for the church, but for the things that lived between. Wolves, spirits, or memories. They no longer prayed for salvation. They prayed for endurance, for the next crust, for the next dawn, for the silence to pass without the scream of another mother, another child. They did not speak of the ones who disappeared, the fires that no longer lit, the cottages that went cold. But they noticed, and they remembered, and they adjusted. Beneath it all, beneath the hunger, beneath the smoke and soot and fear, something older stirred. A memory of a time before laws, before lords, before the church brought order. When survival was its own holiness, when bread was sacred and blood was not always spilled in war. In those dark hours, new rituals emerged. The scraping of bowls became a kind of hymn, the wrapping of hands in shared cloth a confession. Every quiet kindness became a sacrament, every theft a necessary sin. Hunger, they learned, was not just in the belly, it was in the eyes, in the voice, in the places where hope used to sit, and it changed them. Some spoke less, some stopped speaking at all, but others, often the oldest or the youngest, began to whisper things in the dark. Legends, warnings, tricks. How to trick the cold by sleeping in straw. How to heat stones in fire and place them beneath blankets. How to chew birch bark or boil moss. The knowledge that had lived on the edge of memory returned to the center. They listened to the stories now, not as superstition, but as law. And in the spaces between firewood and frostbite, they made decisions. Silent, unspoken decisions about what would be shared, about who would be saved, and about what would not be carried into spring. Because to survive this winter, something had to be left behind. A way of life, a neighbor, a truth. As February turned the snow to grey slush and the wind shifted just slightly to the east, they looked at each other with new eyes, not hopeful, but knowing. What remained was not innocence. It was not faith. It was endurance carved in ice. And far beyond the village, in the forest where no bells rang, something else stirred. A sound, a shadow, or a promise of movement. And the next story would not begin with frost. It would begin with what followed after the hunger, and what the hunger had made them become. In the stillness of a January dawn, when even the birds have gone quiet, a mother presses her palm against the chest of her child. The boy's skin is pale and waxen, but warm enough to give her hope. His breath rises slow, like mist curling from a dying flame. She listens closely. One breath, then another, then stillness again. Behind her, the hearth murmurs, not with warmth, but with the stubborn hiss of damp straw. She coaxes it gently, her fingers cracked and raw, the skin around her nails blackened with soot and cold. The last splinters of firewood lie beside her, no longer logs, but tokens of survival. She touches each one like a relic. There is no more meat. The bones were boiled days ago. No flour, no rye. only roots pulled from beneath the snow, their bitterness numbed by necessity, and water ladled from the creek that groans beneath its icy lid. Up the hill, the manor house sleeps behind shuttered windows. Its gates have not opened since the frost first clung to the thatch. The steward, once a weekly spectre demanding grain and blood, no longer rides down to the village. Perhaps he starves too, or perhaps he feasts. The tithe barn stands hollow, the great doors loose on their hinges, swinging open and shut like the jaws of something long dead. Wind whistles through its beams like a dirge. Rats have found it, and nothing else. The priest remains. A narrow man with red hands and sunken cheeks, who no longer wears his vestments but still opens the chapel doors at dawn. The incense ran out weeks ago. The altar is unlit. But the people come. They sit in silence, or whisper hymns in broken Latin, syllables crumbling like frost beneath their tongues. These are not prayers for salvation. These are lullabies for the dying. In the homes scattered around the chapel, every gesture becomes a ritual. A mother places her foot over a child's to warm it. A boy wraps his arms around the dog that once guarded the livestock. A girl slices bark from a tree and soaks it until it softens. Hunger teaches them to cherish things they once ignored. The warmth of a neighbor's breath, the curl of steam from a boiled leaf, the crack of a twig underfoot signaling a rabbit or something less. They begin to eat things their ancestors warned them against. Crows, frogs, worms. Once cursed as omens, now they are stripped of feathers and cooked over stolen fire. In the dark corners of cellars, mold is scraped from stones and added to broth. Fathers teach sons how to track the veins of lichen on rocks. Daughters sharpen flint to scrape meat from bones so thin they bend in the pot. Oil is rationed like coin. A single drop lights a room. A second is a crime. Firewood is stored not in piles, but in hiding places, behind loose floorboards, beneath straw beds. To be seen carrying wood is to invite envy, and envy now sharpens knives. By February, the snow is no longer white. It stains grey from the smoke of chimneys that now stand cold. Most have burned their last logs. A few have burned their rafters. One family burned their cradle. The ice begins to retreat in places, not with warmth, but with absence. It leaves behind not life, but wet ground and the smell of rot. And yet they wait. Wait for the sound of dripping water, for green to return to the world, for something soft to grow where only frost has reigned. The hunger does not melt with the snow. It lingers. It presses itself into the faces of those who remain. You see it in their cheeks, hollow, collapsed. In their hands, trembling even at rest. In their silence, a silence that weighs heavier than any scream. They have learned not to speak of the hunger. Words waste breath, and breath is too precious. The strong no longer boast, the clever no longer bargain, the kind no longer give. There is only endurance now, a dull, slow endurance made of splinters, bark, and the last scraps of belief. One morning, a boy carries a dead bird to the chapel. It has no feathers. It has no eyes. But he lays it on the altar. The priest says nothing. He places one hand on the boy's head and the other on the cold stone and bows. Outside, the sky softens from iron to ash. A thaw is coming. But not yet. There are moments when warmth does return. Not from the air, but from memory. A mother hums the melody of a feast day. A father closes his eyes and tastes apples he last touched as a boy. The village lives in memory now. It is memory that feeds them, the way it once felt to wake to the smell of bread, the sound of grain poured into sacks, the taste of meat that didn't smell of smoke. Spring will come. The sun will rise higher. Grass will emerge from beneath the muck. Babies will cry, and fields will green. But none of it will erase what was learned in winter. Because hunger is not just an emptiness of the belly, it is a teacher, a punisher, a mirror, and those who survive it carry its shape inside them, even when they are full. They will flinch at waste. They will guard bread crusts like treasure. They will fear the silence before a storm more than the thunder itself. And when they sit at tables again and the plates are filled, they will look at one another and remember. They will remember the bitter roots, the mold, the song in the cold chapel, the cracked hands lighting straw in the dark. And they will eat with reverence. Not joy, not celebration, but reverence. Because now they know. Food is not a right. It is a reprieve. Outside the chapel, a crow lands on the edge of a frozen trough. It pecks at the wood, then lifts into the pale sky. The snow is melting now, slowly, in patches. Beneath it, the earth is black and hard. But in the cracks, something stirs. A green thread. A beginning. And still, beneath that green, beneath every bloom and every harvest yet to come, the memory of this winter will lie waiting, like frost beneath the soil. Not dead, only sleeping. The snow did not fall softly that year. It came like a judgment. Heavy, silent, absolute. It laid its hand over every path and post, pressing the world into stillness. In the mornings, roofs sagged beneath its weight like old men beneath grief. Doors had to be shouldered open with effort, and even breath seemed to freeze on the way out, curling into ghosts that vanished before they could speak. Beneath that hush, life slowed to the rhythm of endurance. A shepherd, cloaked in patched wool, stood high on a hill, his flock long slaughtered or stolen. He no longer watched for wolves. There were none left. Hunger had driven them down weeks ago, and now they too were gone. Bones picked clean in the underbrush or dragging themselves into death. From his perch he looked upon the village below. No smoke rose, no footsteps crossed the white. It was as if the valley had been abandoned by God himself. Yet inside those houses, life clung like a candle's last flame. In one cottage, walls bowed with age and patched with dung and straw, a boy stirred broth that hardly deserved the name. The pot hissed with boiled onion peel, a blackened root, and something he would not name. Once he had been thick with laughter and sun, the kind of lad who chased pigs and dreamed of horses. Now his eyes were too large for his face. His hands shook when they held the ladle. Beside him, his sister worked a needle with trembling fingers, her blood staining the linen like tiny poppies. She had not spoken all day. Her lips were cracked from cold, her voice rationed like the last heel of bread. They sat without speaking, for silence cost nothing, and stillness preserved heat. They had traded everything, first the copper cup, then the hand axe, then their mother's crucifix. For oats, for salt, for bones from the butcher's floor. Nothing remained now but themselves, and even that, hunger tried to take in slow, merciless pieces. Outside, the wind sang across the fields. The church bell had not rung in days, not for mass, nor warning, nor burial. The priest had taken ill, they said, or vanished. No one knew for certain. No one dared check. In the stillness, every sound had weight. A single cough became a signal, a warning, or perhaps a goodbye. The slam of a door, once meaningless, now rang like thunder. And far off, on the edge of the forest, a scream could be heard, brief, animal, unfinished. No one asked. No one went. Winter taught them that mercy was expensive, and curiosity cost more too, than they could afford. Inside that small room, the fire flickered weakly. Its smoke barely rose, choked by wet wood and the damp of the walls. But it was sacred. They fed it like a god, carefully, fearfully, offering scraps of twig and peat as if to beg forgiveness. For if it died, so would they. The boy dipped a wooden spoon into the pot and handed it to his sister. She took it without thanks. Thanks had become unnecessary. They both understood the contract. Survival first, everything else after. She sipped. He watched. Then she passed it back. One bowl, one spoon, one ritual, repeated night after night, until they forgot when it had begun. And yet, against all reason, a strange grace clung to these moments, in the way she tucked the thread gently under the tear, in how he folded the cloak around his knees, as their father once had, in the smell of boiled onion rising like incense, filling the hollow of their home with something that felt like memory. Outside, the world narrowed. Hunger made it so. Time was no longer counted in days or feasts or holy days, but in bowls, in embers, in breaths that steamed against the cold. No one dreamed of spring anymore. Spring was a lie told by those who hadn't known famine. And yet somehow, they did not curse. They did not weep. They endured. Their mother used to say, "When bread disappears, the soul comes forth." The boy hadn't understood it then. He did now. Because hunger took what was useless first: vanity, noise, anger. It burned away the unnecessary. And what remained, rituals, glances, breath, became holy. Even the silence. Especially the silence. Each night, as the sun bled out behind the hills, they performed the same rites. She stitched. He stirred. They shared. Then they lay side by side, beneath wool and straw and memory, and waited. For warmth, for morning, for something unnamed to pass. Sometimes he dreamed of wheat, golden, bending, endless. Sometimes she dreamed of her mother's hands, rubbing warmth into her palms. But mostly, there were no dreams, only stillness, as if even there, the minds had learned to ration movement. Then one night a knock came. Not loud, just 2 soft taps. They froze, not in fear but in calculation. A knock meant hunger, or madness, or worse, desperation, and desperation had teeth. He rose slowly, cloak dragging, and took the iron poker from beside the hearth. His sister stood too, eyes wide. Another knock. When he opened the door, no one stood there. Only snow, and a basket. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was half a loaf of dark bread, and a strip of dried meat. No note, no sound, no tracks. He stared at it like a miracle. His sister covered her mouth. He brought it inside with reverence, as if it might vanish. And for the first time in weeks, he smiled. Not from joy, but from disbelief. It felt like something forgotten had returned. Kindness, perhaps, or providence. They did not eat it all. They hid half in the thatch, just in case. That night they slept warmer, not from food, but from the knowledge that someone, somewhere, had chosen to give. In a world that had forgotten such things, it felt like a rebellion. And outside, the snow kept falling, unbothered, beautiful, indifferent. But inside, the silence had changed. It no longer sounded like the end. It sounded like waiting. Waiting for the next knock. Waiting for spring. Waiting for the thaw. The bell tolls once, then nothing. No echo. No birds. No voices. Just the vast white silence of a village smothered in snow, where even memory seems to freeze in place. A single sound, swallowed by distance and the cold. The rooftops glitter like crowns of the dead, their icicles dripping slowly like time itself bleeding out. Each path is etched with the fossil prints of those who walked, and those who no longer do. every door sealed in frost, every breath taken in shallow defiance. There are no crowds here, no chaos, only stillness. The kind that comes after the shouting
has ended, and only the waiting remains.
Inside a crumbling cottage wrapped in burlap and desperation, a boy opens his eyes. He does not cry. He stares upward, watching frost bloom like creeping vines across the rafters, silent white veins on decaying wood. He has dreamed of bread again. Not the taste, not the warmth, only the idea of it. A memory passed down from a time he does not remember. His mother, hollow-eyed but gently smiling, places before him a steaming bowl of nothing. Boiled onion skin, a stone, a prayer. The broth smells of lies and love. She spoons it into his hands like it matters. She does not eat. She only watches. Each gesture is sacred now. A quiet theater of hope for an audience of one. Even her shivering becomes part of the ritual. A mother's dignity, measured in silence and sacrifice. The village itself is more tomb than town. The baker's roof has collapsed, the weight of ice heavier than debt. The bell tower leans slightly now, like an old man giving up. The well is sealed by a lid of ice too thick to break, too deep to dream of spring. The chapel door swings open with each gust of wind, as if waiting for someone brave enough, or foolish enough, to still believe. And then the wind sings. It moves through broken shingles, over collapsed stalls, through the window frames of those who no longer breathe. It carries no scent, only memory. Ash, smoke, pine, the smell of endings. The dead are buried without fanfare. No priests, no names, just hands digging through permafrost with splinters and sleeves. They are marked with scraps of color, a red cloth, a strip of leather, a twig laid in the shape of a cross. Not to remember them by name, but to remember that they were once warm. No one counts the dead aloud. To do so would invite despair. Grief is for those with time. Here, mourning is compressed into glances, into the act of survival itself, the act of not turning away. Yet, against all logic, there is rhythm. It persists. A girl kneels beside her brother, rubbing his feet with hands red and raw. She hums softly, not a lullaby, not even a tune, just sound to prove she still can. An old man pulls herbs from the last pouch sewn inside his coat, crushing them between brittle fingers and dropping them into a stranger's cup. No words, just offering. A boy and a girl share the same coat. A woman braids her sister's hair, even as her hands tremble. And at dusk, as the last grey light drains from the world, something ancient returns. A single flame flickers behind each surviving window, not for light, not for warmth, but for defiance. One by one, the houses bloom with tiny golden hearts. They do not push back the darkness, they whisper through it. We remain. This is not resistance, not revolution, not even courage. It is something colder, older, a will honed in famine, forged in snow, a refusal to vanish. Because winter is not just a season here, it is a trial, a judgment, and to endure it, silently, together, is the final act of faith. In spring, these candles will be forgotten. The frozen footprints will vanish into thawed earth, and even the graves will be swallowed by moss and rain. But tonight, this tiny rebellion of fire holds a power no army can command. It says, we remember, we remain, and we will be here when the snow is gone. Somewhere, beyond the trees, beyond the reach of frostbite and time, another bell waits to ring, a second note, a signal, that something is coming, that the silence may yet be broken. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight is for the living, and the nearly gone, and the light they choose to leave behind.